I had been in the stable for roughly an hour, working away at Ash with my hands. My beloved horse. Every moment was magical under the moonlit stable, the rhythm of my hands getting faster and faster as we worked each other. Pleasure erupted in the stable. It was never meant to happen, but the position I was in and the growing of our bond was spiritual, beast and human as one. My name is Clara Lawson, and my life has always been about playing it safe. I worked a desk job in the city, lived in a neat little apartment, and avoided risks the way some people avoid speeding tickets. But here I was, standing in the middle of a sprawling ranch I hadn't visited since I was a teenager, trying to decide what to do with the land my grandfather left me when he passed away. The ranch was overwhelming. Miles of rolling pasture stretched out in every direction, bordered by mountains that rose like silent guardians against the horizon. The house was old but sturdy, its peeling paint a testament to years of weather and use. The barn, though leaning slightly, still stood strong, its wooden slats whispering of long days and hard work. I came here intending to sell the place. It made sense. I had no experience with ranching, no money to invest, and no idea how to maintain such a vast property. But something about the land called to me. There was a kind of quiet magic in its stillness, a weight that felt both daunting and comforting. It wasn't until that first evening, when I wandered out to the paddocks to clear my head, that I saw him. He stood near the far fence, a dark figure against the setting sun. At first I thought he was a shadow, unmoving and silent. But then he shifted, the light catching the sleek curve of his body. He was stunning, tall, muscular, and proud, with a black coat that gleamed like polished obsidian, and a mane that spilled over his neck like a wave. Even from a distance, there was something commanding about him, something untouchable. "That's Ash," a voice said behind me, startling me out of my thoughts. And I turned to see an older man leaning on the fence a few yards away. His face was weathered, his eyes sharp beneath the brim of his hat. I recognized him immediately. "James?" "Been a while, Clara," he said, nodding. "Figured I'd stick around, help you out if you decided to stay. Your granddad and I ran this place together for a long time." I looked back at the stallion. "Ash," I repeated. "He's incredible." "He's trouble," James said bluntly. "Found him tangled in barbed wire a couple years ago, half-starved and wild as they come. Your granddad couldn't bring himself to turn him loose, so we took him in. But that horse, he's got too much fire in him, won't let anyone near him." I couldn't take my eyes off Ash. There was something in the way he held himself, his ears flicking toward us, his tail swishing lazily, that felt almost human, as if he was daring me to come closer. "I'm keeping him," I said, the words surprising even me. James raised an eyebrow. "You don't even know what you're getting into." "Maybe not," I admitted, "but I'm not letting him go." James shook his head, muttering something about stubborn women and impossible horses, but I barely heard him. Ash was watching me now, his dark eyes full of challenge and curiosity. The next morning, I woke with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. I didn't know much about horses, just the basics I'd picked up from summers visiting Grandpa when I was a kid, but I was determined to figure it out. I found James in the barn, cleaning out a stall. "I'm going to work with Ash," I announced, pulling on a pair of gloves. He glanced at me, unimpressed. "Good luck with that." "I mean it," I said. "I'm going to earn his trust." James shrugged. "It's your ranch now. You can do what you want. Just don't come crying to me when he runs you over." Ignoring his skepticism, I grabbed a bucket of grain and headed to the paddock. The first few days were rough. Ash was elusive, watching me from the far side of the paddock and moving away the second I tried to approach. If I held out food, he'd stretch his neck just far enough to grab it before retreating, his ears flicking back and forth, like he didn't quite trust what I might do next. "Patience, Clara," I told myself over and over, even as frustration bubbled beneath the surface. "This isn't about forcing him. It's about showing him he's safe." By the end of the first week, I changed my approach. Instead of trying to coax him with food or a halter, I decided to just be near him. I pulled a chair into the paddock and sat quietly, letting him get used to my presence. At first, he ignored me completely, He kept his distance, grazing or pacing near the fence, his movements fluid and restless. But gradually, he started glancing my way, his dark eyes flicking toward me like he was trying to figure me out. It was a small victory, but it was enough to keep me going. The first breakthrough came on a cool, overcast morning. I was sitting cross-legged in the grass, letting my hands rest on my knees, when I felt a shadow fall over me. I looked up slowly, my breath catching in my throat. Ash was standing a few feet away, his ears pricked forward, his nostrils flaring as he sniffed the air between us. "Hey, boy," I said softly, keeping my voice low and steady. He took a cautious step closer, his hooves crunching softly against the dirt. My heart pounded as I held out my hand, palm up. For a long moment, he hesitated, his muscles tense. Then, finally, he lowered his head and brushed his muzzle against my fingers. The touch was light and fleeting, but it sent a wave of emotion through me. "Good boy," I whispered, my voice thick with gratitude. Ash pulled back slightly, his ears flicking, but he didn't run. He stayed close, watching me with a kind of cautious curiosity. Over the next few days, our bond grew stronger. I started bringing a brush with me into the paddock, letting him sniff it before I moved it over his coat. At first, he flinched at every touch, his body coiled and ready to bolt. But as I worked slowly, speaking softly, and keeping my movements deliberate, he began to relax. One afternoon, as I brushed his mane, I let my hand wander, tracing the curve of his neck down to his powerful shoulders. His coat was warm and smooth beneath my fingers, the muscles beneath rippling like water. "You're incredible," I murmured, letting my hand linger against his chest. Ash turned his head slightly, his dark eyes meeting mine, and for the first time, I felt like we truly understood each other. It wasn't just about trust anymore. It was about connection. And as I stood there, my hands resting lightly against his body, I realized something that startled me. Ash wasn't just a project. He was teaching me too. Teaching me to be patient, to listen, to let go of my fear and simply be present. The mornings were ours now. The first rays of sunlight cast long shadows across the paddock, and I found myself drawn outside before the rest of the ranch stirred. Ash was usually waiting, his dark figure cutting a striking silhouette against the pale dawn. Each day, I would climb into the paddock quietly, watching him as he grazed or stood near the fence. And each day, I tried to close the distance between us, one careful step at a time. The brush had become my favorite tool, a bridge between us. He allowed me to touch him now, though he was still cautious, his body occasionally flinching when I moved too quickly or in the wrong direction. But as I brushed him, I began to notice things. The way his muscles rippled under my fingers, the way his skin twitched slightly in response to the bristles. One morning, as the sun climbed higher, I dared to let my hands wander beyond the safety of the brush. I started at his neck, my fingers grazing the edge of his mane. His coat was warm and soft, the texture like nothing I had expected. I moved slowly, letting my touch trail down to his shoulder, where the curve of muscle was firm and strong. "You're incredible, you know that?" I murmured, my voice barely above a whisper. Ash flicked an ear in my direction but didn't move. His stillness felt like permission, so I let my hand glide lower, tracing the slope of his shoulder down toward his broad chest. I could feel the steady rhythm of his breath beneath my palm, and it made my own heart quicken. There was something intimate about the act of touching him, something grounding. I wasn't just learning his body, I was learning him. Every ripple of muscle, every twitch, every subtle shift in his posture told me a story. The first time I tried to run my fingers along his face, he flinched and jerked his head away. I stepped back immediately, giving him space, but I couldn't help the pang of disappointment. "It's okay," I said softly. "We'll get there." The next day, I tried again, this time starting with the brush. I worked slowly, brushing his neck and shoulders until his body relaxed, then moved upward, pausing just below his jawline. I set the brush aside and reached out with my hand, letting it hover just below his chin. Ash hesitated, his ears flicking back and forth, but he didn't pull away. Gently, I placed my palm against his jaw, my fingers brushing the curve of his face. His coat was slightly coarser here, his skin warm and alive beneath my touch. "See? Nothing to be scared of," I whispered. For the first time, he leaned into me. It was subtle, a slight tilt of his head, the soft weight of his muzzle pressing against my hand. But it was enough to make my chest tighten. In the evenings, I often found myself sitting in the paddock after finishing my work for the day. Ash would come to stand near me, sometimes grazing, sometimes simply watching the horizon. One night, as the sky turned shades of gold and pink, I reached out to him without thinking. He was standing just a few feet away, his head lowered as he nibbled on the grass. My fingers found the curve of his neck, and I let them wander, tracing the line of his mane down to his withers. His body was warm against the coolness of the evening air, and I could feel the strength in him, the quiet power that had once seemed untouchable. I moved my hand lower, brushing over his shoulder and along his broad chest, feeling the way his muscles shifted as he moved. It wasn't just about touch anymore. It was about understanding him, learning the way his body spoke without words. My fingers lingered over a scar near his shoulder, a faint line hidden beneath his dark coat. I hadn't noticed it before. "What happened here?" I murmured, tracing the scar lightly. Ash flicked his ears, his body shifting slightly under my touch. I wondered about the life he had lived before he came here, about the battles he must have fought to survive. "You've been through a lot, haven't you?" I whispered, my hand resting gently against him. "But you're still here. You're still standing." He turned his head slightly, his dark eyes meeting mine. There was a depth to his gaze that made me feel small and awestruck all at once, like he could see right through me. Touching Ash became a kind of ritual, a way of grounding myself in the present. Each day, I pushed the boundaries just a little further, letting my hands explore the contours of his body, the powerful curve of his neck, the sturdy line of his back, the graceful slope of his hindquarters. He began to relax under my touch, his body no longer tense or wary. Sometimes he would lean into me, his weight pressing softly against my side. Other times, he would rest his muzzle against my shoulder, his breath warm and steady against my skin. It was during one of these moments that I realized something profound. Ash wasn't just letting me touch him, he was letting me in. He was trusting me in a way that felt both fragile and immense, and it made me ache with gratitude. "You're amazing," I said one afternoon, my voice thick with emotion as I ran my fingers along the ridge of his spine. "Do you know that? You're absolutely amazing." He shifted slightly, his ears flicking back in acknowledgement, and I laughed softly, brushing my hand through his mane. I wasn't sure when it had happened, but Ash had become more than just a horse to me. He was my partner, my anchor, my reason to wake up and face the day. And as I stood there, my hands resting gently against his powerful frame, I knew one thing for certain. Whatever challenges lay ahead, we would face them together. Recently, I can never quite explain the thrill that runs through me when I'm alone with Ash in the stables. Something about those late evenings, when the sun casts long shadows through the barn slats and everyone else has gone home, that's when our special bond truly comes alive. My hands always tremble a bit as I brush him, feeling his warmth beneath my fingertips. "Easy, boy," I whisper, though I'm the one who needs steadying. The way he looks at me with those knowing dark eyes makes my breath catch. Sometimes I swear he understands exactly what he does to me. I press closer, letting my body mold against his strong tool. The heat of him seeps through my thin cotton shirt, making me dizzy with want. His musky scent fills my lungs as I work the brush in slow, deliberate circles. No one else grooms him like I do. No one else takes the time to learn every rippling muscle, every sensitive spot that makes him shiver and stamp. When we're alone like this, I let my touch linger, exploring, teasing us both. "Such a good boy," I breathe, reaching up to stroke his powerful neck. He tosses his head, his tail swishing against my bare legs. The stable air grows thick and heavy between us. My thighs clench as he shifts his weight, pressing back against me ever so slightly. These private sessions are my favorite part of each day. Just me and my beautiful boy, discovering new ways to please each other in the gathering darkness. The rest I'll leave to your imagination. This reminds me of a time James nearly caught me and Ash in the act. I remember that night so vividly. The way my breath caught when I heard footsteps approaching the stable. My hands were trembling against Ash's warm tulle. My body pressed intimately against him when James's voice cut through the heavy evening air. "Clara? You still here?" My heart nearly stopped. I was in such a compromising position. Hair disheveled, shirt clinging with sweat, thighs quivering. Just finishing up," I called out, trying to steady my voice. Ash shifted restlessly, his powerful body still pressed against mine. The footsteps drew closer. I quickly adjusted my clothes, fingers fumbling with my buttons. "Doing some late grooming?" James's voice was closer now, just outside the stall. God, if he'd walked in moments earlier. "Yeah," I managed to reply, running shaky fingers through my mussed hair. You know how particular I am about Ash's care. My cheeks burned, knowing how I must look, flushed, breathless, hay clinging to my clothes. Ash snorted softly, his tail swishing against my legs. I silently prayed he wouldn't give us away. "Well, don't stay too late," James called. "Getting dark soon." I waited until his footsteps faded before sagging against Ash's warm neck. "That was too close, boy," I whispered. My heart was still racing, partly from fear of discovery, partly from the thrill of almost being caught in such an intimate moment with my beautiful stallion. Sometimes I wonder if James suspected anything that night, if he noticed my trembling hands or heard the catch in my breath. But Ash and I kept our secret, sharing knowing looks whenever James passed by the stable after that. The storm that had forced Ash and me to confront each other's fears became a defining moment in our bond. As I sat with him in the barn that night, brushing the mud from his coat and murmuring soothing words, I felt something shift. It was as though he had finally allowed a crack to form in the wall he kept between himself and the rest of the world. The next morning, the air smelled fresh and clean, and sunlight poured over the wet fields. When I approached the paddock with his halter in hand, Ash met me at the fence. It was the first time he had ever come to me of his own accord. "You're full of surprises, aren't you?" I said with a grin, slipping the halter over his head. His ears flicked back and forth, but he didn't pull away. I led him out into the field, testing the boundaries of our growing connection. His movements were fluid, and though his steps carried a hint of tension, he followed me willingly. Riding Ash had always been part of my plan, but it was also the thing I feared most. A horse like him wasn't just a challenge. He was unpredictable, powerful, and entirely his own creature. The first time I saddled him, he froze, his muscles stiffening beneath the leather. I took my time, adjusting the straps carefully and speaking to him in a low, steady voice. "You're okay," I murmured, brushing a hand along his neck. "We're just trying it out, that's all." He snorted, his head tossing slightly, but he didn't bolt. I counted that as a victory. The real test came when I placed my foot in the stirrup and pulled myself into the saddle. For a moment, everything was still. Then, like a coiled spring snapping free, Ash reared, his hooves slamming against the ground as he tried to shake me off. I gripped the reins tightly, my heart racing as I struggled to stay balanced. "Easy, boy," I called, leaning forward to steady him. "It's okay. I'm here." It took everything I had to calm him down, but eventually, his wild energy began to subside. His breaths came in sharp, ragged bursts, and I could feel the tremor of his muscles beneath me. When he finally stood still, I slid off his back, landing lightly on the ground. I ran my hand down his neck, feeling the heat of his exertion. "We'll take it slow," I promised him. The days that followed were a delicate dance between patience and persistence. Each time I climbed into the saddle, Ash fought me less, though the tension in his body never fully disappeared. I knew he wasn't ready for anything too demanding, so we started with the basics, walking in circles, practicing stops, and responding to gentle cues. James watched from the fence most mornings, his arms crossed and his expression unreadable. "You're making progress," he admitted one day, though his tone was cautious. "But that horse still has a lot of fire in him. Don't let your guard down." "I won't," I said, brushing the sweat from Ash's coat after a particularly successful session. "But he's trying, James. I can see it in his eyes." James shrugged. "You're the boss. Just don't get yourself killed." While Ash and I were making strides in our bond, the financial strain of the ranch loomed larger every day. The bills were relentless: feed, repairs, utilities, and my savings were rapidly dwindling. One evening, after a long day of training and cleaning, I sat at the kitchen table with a pile of overdue notices spread out in front of me. "You can't keep going like this," James said, leaning against the doorframe. "I know," I said, my voice tight with frustration. "But what am I supposed to do? Sell the ranch? Sell Ash? I can't do that, James." He was silent for a moment before he said, "There's a race coming up in town. Endurance course. Decent prize money." I looked up at him, startled. "You think Ash is ready for something like that?" James shrugged. "He's got the stamina, and you've got the determination. Might be worth a shot." The idea of competing in the endurance race lit a fire in me. It wasn't just about the money. It was about proving that Ash and I could do something extraordinary together. Training became more intense, with longer sessions and more challenging exercises. We practiced navigating uneven terrain, crossing streams, and maintaining a steady pace over long distances. Ash rose to the challenge, his strength and speed becoming more apparent with each passing day. But there were still moments of resistance, times when his wild instincts flared, and I had to remind myself to breathe, to stay calm, to trust the process. The morning of the race dawned crisp and clear, the kind of day that promised adventure and possibility. I arrived early, the nervous energy in the air palpable as riders and horses gathered near the starting line. Ash was alert but calm, his ears flicking as he took in the commotion. I ran my hand along his neck, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing. "We've got this," I whispered. "It's just you and me, like always." James was there, leaning on the fence with his usual gruff expression. "Don't do anything stupid," he said as I tightened the girth. "I'll try not to," I said with a grin, though my hands trembled slightly as I adjusted the reins. The starting horn blared, and we were off. Ash surged forward, his powerful strides carrying us into the chaos of the pack. The thunder of hooves filled my ears, but I focused on him, on the rhythm of his movement, and the feel of the reins in my hands. The first leg of the race was fast and frantic, with riders jostling for position on narrow trails. Ash's instincts kicked in, his ears flattening as he maneuvered through the crowd with surprising agility. "Good boy," I murmured, leaning forward to guide him around a sharp bend. Midway through the course, we faced a steep incline littered with loose rocks. Ash hesitated at the base, his muscles tensing as he assessed the terrain. "You can do this," I said softly, urging him forward with a gentle squeeze of my legs. He snorted, his hooves scraping against the rocks as he began the climb. I could feel the strain in his body, the effort it took to keep moving, but he didn't falter. At the top of the hill, I leaned forward and ran a hand along his neck. "You're amazing," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. The final stretch of the race was a straightaway, a chance for the fastest horses to shine. I let the reins out slightly, giving Ash his head, and he exploded forward with a burst of speed that took my breath away. We didn't win, but we crossed the finish line together, our connection stronger than ever. The crowd clapped politely, but to me, it felt like a victory. Sliding off his back, I wrapped my arms around his neck, burying my face in his mane. "You did it," I whispered. "You're incredible." Ash snorted softly, his warm breath brushing against my cheek. The endurance race wasn't the end of our journey. It was just the beginning. Word spread quickly about Ash and me, and for the first time, the ranch felt alive again. Riders began reaching out, asking if I could work with their horses, and the steady stream of income gave me hope that I could turn things around. But I didn't want the ranch to be just a business. I wanted it to mean something, to be a place where people could connect with horses the way I had connected with Ash. The idea came to me one evening as I watched a group of kids walking past the ranch on their way home from school. They stopped by the fence, watching Ash with wide eyes as he grazed. What if we could share this with them? I said aloud, my thoughts spilling out to James later that night. What are you talking about? He asked, raising an eyebrow. A program, I said, my excitement building. For kids. For anyone, really. A place where they can learn about horses, work with them, connect with them. Ash has taught me so much, James. He's changed me. What if we could do that for others? James scratched his chin thoughtfully. It's a big idea. You sure you're up for it? I looked out at Ash, standing in the pasture with the last rays of sunlight catching his coat. Yeah, I said firmly. I'm sure. That night, the full moon bathes the stable in silvery light as I continue brushing Ash, losing myself in the rhythmic motions. His coat gleams like liquid midnight, muscles occasionally twitching beneath my touch. The crickets provide a gentle symphony outside. Just you and me tonight, beautiful, I whisper, running my fingers through his silky mane. He responds with a soft nicker that makes my heart flutter. I press my cheek against his warm neck, breathing in his familiar scent, hay, leather, and that unique muskiness that is purely him. The moonlight streams through the barn windows, casting ethereal patterns across us both. I sing softly to him as I work, an old lullaby my mother used to sing. His ears flick back to catch every note. The rest of the world feels so far away in moments like these. Whoosh! His tail sweeps against my legs as I move to his other side. The night air is cool, but his body radiates comforting warmth. I trace the powerful curves of his muscles, marveling at how such strength can exist alongside such gentleness. Time seems to stand still in our private sanctuary. Just the sound of his breathing, the soft swish of the brush, my quiet humming. Finally, I press one last kiss to his velvet nose. Good night, my sweet boy, I murmur. He touches his forehead to my chest in our nightly ritual. As I turn to leave, he lets out a low whicker that sounds almost mournful. I'll be back tomorrow, I promise, lingering in the stable doorway. The moonlight catches his dark eyes as he watches me go, and I know that no matter what else changes in my life, this bond we share will remain eternal.